Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sales Uncharted. And I've always promised my listeners that I'm going to go out there and find some very unique people, unique characters that do something very unique, very different. Bringing on sales VPs sounds like a great idea, right? Because I think everyone wants to hear from a sales VP to understand what's happening out there. Sales VPs will talk about technique. And I had the show which I call Sales Uncharted. So the bottom line is that I do not want to bring sales VPs on to talk about technique and stuff that happens on a daily basis. You, my B2B seller, are already suffering with that on a daily basis. What I do want to do, and I'm very super excited that the individual I brought on board today is really, really, really a cool guy, someone who's doing some amazing work. I actually am very happy to call out Nik Payne, who's joining us today. I bumped into Nik because of some work that I was doing with Gamma as a Gambassador. I love the product that Gamma has. I like the thought of experimenting with a tool that calls itself a Microsoft Slayer, right? I mean, come on, what is this? I mean, so here I am. I start playing around with the tool about 2 years ago, Nik, is when I really got introduced to it. And I actually said to myself, bit clunky, but I like the direction. I like the way that they're thinking about this. I started experimenting to the point where one day I just got an email from Gamma saying, hey, you've been using our tool a lot. We have this program. We'd love for you to be part of our community. And I became part of that community. And then I love this, Nick, but I kept getting promoted to a ambassador. Now I get promoted to ambassador council. So I love all this stuff. I'm just waiting for the fire-breathing dragons to come roost in my backyard one day as we complete this entire thing, or like Jedi Knights. I had the privilege of meeting Nick face to face when I actually went into Gamma's inaugural sales lab. And Nick and I have been on and off in terms of giving feedback. And I really felt that Nick has a way of looking at things that I really wanted to bring and have his voice heard out. Everyone knows Gamma. What people don't know is that Gamma has a tremendous community, a group of followers. But what they also don't know is that Gamma has some very smart people that work on product, that work on design. And today, and I'm very grateful, Nick, for you accepting this opportunity. Nick, let's start off by you telling the world, who is Nik Payne? What pains do you solve for? Get the joke, pain. And what do you do at Gamma? And what's the journey that got you to Gamma? I would really want my listeners to get some benefit out of this one.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Nik Payne. I'm a product designer, generally from Santa Cruz. And I kind of found my way to product design after trying a couple of different things. I was like the artsy kid in high school. So in a different universe, I might have gotten an MFA. I studied economics at college, but both my parents are engineers. So I sort of landed at econ after trying some engineering. But then, yeah, senior year, I discovered human-centered design. And it really felt like it was sort of up my alley. This mix of like pragmatic thinking, but also a little bit creative and divergent. And then, yeah, after that, I studied a little bit of computer science. Then I ended up going to a design boot camp, and that took me to Chicago. I was there for about 6 years, and I came back to join Gamma, actually, here in the Bay Area, and that was 4 years ago. But I joined because I really wanted to do the small startup thing. I'd been in a large company, and then a company of about 150 people, and I joined Gamma as the 11th employee. And it's been a fun ride so far. Yeah.
So, Greg, I have to ask you, how many employees now? I think you guys crossed the 80 or 100 mark, something like that, correct?
Yeah, I think we're in the 80s right now. So we're growing a
Okay,
lot.
I'm with you. So, when we say product design, Nick, what exactly do you mean by that? Because most of my audience are B2B sellers. These are guys that are at the coal face. They're selling a service or a product,
Yeah.
particularly at B2B organizations, right? Not B2C. Now, here comes along a product designer from Gamma, very large B2C presence. I believe you guys are trying to break into the B2B game. I'm very excited about that. But what exactly does a product designer do? And if and not necessarily a definition, but more like what exactly are you doing at Gamma that would really make sense of your capabilities and your contribution to Gamma?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would think about it in terms of there's kind of a business layer or the abstract layer of like what value are you providing, and that will come in the form of like what features are you actually building and what are you prioritizing. And so some of the work I would say is upstream, and it's trying to figure out like, well, what problems are people running into, or where are there gaps in our product, and figuring out what we should build next. And that has some overlap with product management, I would say. But that is sort of the upstream of design, the intangible, like what problems are we trying to solve, or what area do we want to get into, all the way through the screens that you see. And I think that's the piece of design that most people are familiar with. And so, yeah, it's thinking through interactions, it's building interactive prototypes, looking at the design systems of the surface itself. But it's very different, I would say, than graphic design or a, like truly creative profession in the sense that you're operating under a lot of constraints, and it's actually a lot more analytical than I thought going in. But yeah, so it's all the way from sort of thinking through the what of what we're building all the way through, yeah, like delivering it and shipping screens. Sorry, I think you
I have
cut
a
out for a
question
second.
for you. A lot of
Yeah.
salespeople ask you, I work with salespeople, and salespeople tell me that I am a very key person. I bring a lot of feedback on the product back to the company, right?
Hmm.
Now, in the case of Gamma, when you're getting all this feedback, right? Salespeople are a conduit, potentially, yes.
Yeah.
But Nick, when you get feedback, how do you react to feedback? How exactly do you position feedback to make the product better? Is there like a methodology, a system, or a thought process that you guys go through?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to the first thing you mentioned, right? Sales is a conduit for feedback. This is actually something we've been experimenting now. We have our head of GTM, Diana, who built this basically this call recording funnel, and it's taking sales calls, piping them into Notion, and then
Yes.
pulling out key moments and feeding it back into the Slack channel. And so it's a sort of always on feed of information. But I don't know that we have exactly nailed how to take the feedback and build maybe sort of an automatic prioritization framework for it. I think step one is just getting people uh, to be empathetic and to care about the feedback in general. And one of the things I've seen over 4 years is that you don't necessarily have to act on every bit of feedback, but letting it
Ooh.
permeate through the consciousness of the company is actually really valuable unto itself. And then obviously then there's maybe a more formal layer of, how do we aggregate feedback into patterns? How do we separate out which feedback we care the most about, and then which things we want to prioritize? Yeah,
So I'm going to dig into that one there.
sure.
So we just acknowledge that sales teams hear what customers say in calls. You have some sort of an automation that allows you to participate in that without being on the call, understand what those asks are. But now here's the funny thing. Salespeople or people will come to you with lots of stuff, right? They tell you that, oh, this is what the user did, this is what the what's the biggest gap that you see between stated needs and real behavior? Surely you always have people running up to you saying, I need this feature and this, but when you deploy the feature, suddenly you say, wait a minute, no one's adopting it. What happened here? Is that common? Is that often? And then how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, well, okay, so one thing I can say is that our B2B motion, like we haven't had sales really until fall of last year. So this is all very new. And we've been a very product-led company kind of going up to this. But in order to get across the finish line with larger organizations, we absolutely need a sales team. And so they're doing a lot of great work right now.
Sure.
I think the number one problem is that the asks come in kind of underspecified. And so uh, someone might tell you, I need this such and such thing. And I think we just hired someone who's doing the product management on the sort of B2B side. And he had this framework for thinking through sort of checkboxy features, right? Which is a lot of the compliance stuff. And I would call it like high precedent feature work from other products where you don't want to actually do anything unique. You just want to match sort of what's out there and what's required
What's
of
out
you.
there, what's existing. Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
but then
sense.
there's this fuzzy layer, right? What might be unique to your product. And people I think will often think in terms of solutions, especially if they can't like fully articulate the problem, or they'll think of like the first solution that they have in mind. And so as a designer, part of your job is to kind of unpack the why behind that and to go a little bit up the abstraction ladder. So can you tell me more and try to get a fuller picture of what they're actually running into?
So here's the fun part. In my interactions with you, one of the things that I realized about you is that you're a great listener, which was very interesting for me. You actually were not interrupting me. You would let me finish my flow. And I think that's actually a great, great attribute, I guess, because you sometimes have to let people finish the train of thought so that you know what exactly is he talking about, right? So if I look at some of the attributes and how you function, and if you were to be talking to a salesperson and telling them, when you're talking to a, let's say, customer directly, Nick, what methodology or framework do you apply that you think a salesperson could possibly learn from? And I've already given you a hint, right? That you're a great listener. I think that any salesperson listening right now, you got to understand when you're with a customer, you got to use the 2:1 ratio. And I think, Nick, you do that very well. And I just want to call you out on that. But in
Thanks.
general, what would you say to a salesperson in terms of the right philosophical grounding, the right way to converse with a user to
Mm.
actually understand what they're trying to get at? How would you go about explaining that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's one trick that we use in design a lot, and that would be, trying to ask open-ended questions. And so rather than asking yes or no questions, ask more, yeah, leave kind of space open that with questions that aren't biasing. But one of the things we also do is always lead with asking about sort of real experiences. So can you tell me about the last time you did X, Y, or Z? Ends up being very powerful, because rather than thinking in a sort of abstract layer
Yeah.
about what they generally do, they'll anchor to like a real story. And so if you want to understand someone's workflow, or there's sort of real lived experiences, which will, I think, tend to pull out pain points in the way they work and maybe help with a sales angle. I'm not sure, I'm not a salesperson. But yeah, ask about real experiences, and also just like leaving white space in the conversation for that person to talk. I'm not a salesperson, but I've been on demo calls where it feels like sometimes we're over presenting and we have sort of a script we want to get through. But I've certainly observed, like, sometimes people will come in and they just want 2 or 3 questions answered too. And so if you're, you know, if you've kind of turned on this, I don't know exactly, like a script, it might not be relevant to what they just
You
what
know what,
they want,
Nick?
right?
This is $1 million conversation. I'm leaning in, my friend, and I'll tell you why I'm leaning in, because you just opened the proverbial can of worms. There are 2 things that I'm going to pick your brain on. Number
Sure,
one, let's
sure.
talk about it. In sales, we talk about discovery as a process to understand your customer's pain point and what they're solving for. You, in your conversation, actually just alluded to it. You actually said and called out that when you're talking with a user, you actually want to understand the context in which they used your product in. And without understanding that context, you typically keep your mouth shut, listen until you get to a point where the aha moment, right? And the aha moment for salespeople is actually very similar as well. You really need to let a conversation flow. You need to ask the right questions. And until you don't hit the mother load, as you call, you didn't call it, but I'm thinking that's what I heard. You keep asking those questions and digging in, and you keep getting this. And I also think that one of the things that you most likely are doing, which I recommend to salespeople to focus on, is not asking open-ended questions. Do you like this design? Yes, no. How can I improve this design? Is typically, Nick, how I've heard you talk to me. What are you trying to do with the Deepak? Could you show me your workflow? Could you show me how you operate today? And I think that's a great conversation. And I think for salespeople listening in, I would argue you've just got a great example of discovery. Discovery you thought was only something that you use in sales. And here's Nick actually explaining that he also uses discovery in his own way to actually understand a customer's way of using a tool, the utility they get out of it, and potentially what problem are they solving for. Because if he's discussing a feature with you, then the question you should be asking him, what will you do with this feature? How will it change your life? How will it improve your life? And then the next question is, if it improves his life, will it improve the lives of others? I don't know, but I really like that. The second thing you said, Nick, which I really want to tell you and congratulate you on, is you just brought in one of my biggest beating points on salespeople is they get to demo too fast, too quick. And when they get to it, they actually hammer the customer for an hour on why their product is the best thing since sliced cheese or bread, but never tell them how it matters to them. And I really like the fact that you actually wavered a bit at the end. You said, I don't know how to say this, but I sometimes feel it's too scripted. That's what I recall, right, Nick?
Yeah.
Too scripted, too. It's like that's exactly a great point. I always tell salespeople, if you're going to go in with the demo, and if a product designer is actually telling you that he sits in demos and he just feels that the demo is just overloaded and it's not hitting the spot, that's a big learning right there for everyone. One of the metrics that we use in sales quite a lot, Nick, which is a misplaced metric, is count of demos done. And a lot of SaaS companies actually think that doing a demo is the best thing that could happen to them. And I argue, oh, they start with demos. And when you lead with the demo, Nick, you made a big problem. You're now got your product top of mind and you're leading with your product. You're never leading with what the customer wants. And that's the
Yeah.
biggest
Yeah.
problem right there. Right there. So I really like the fact that you touched on the demo. That surprised me a bit, but I really wanted to jump in and kind of connect the dots for salespeople listening in on that. Would,
Have
would,
you ever
would
played
you
that?
add any flavor to that, Nick?
Yeah, well, I mean, have you ever played that game Battleship, right? Where, you're trying to sink boats and you don't know exactly where they are. Uh, you're only going to know what moments are really going to wow someone if you ask all that context up front. You get information about what they really care about. And then you can actually just have a much more focused demo and be very confident that what you demo is going to land, right? Because you already know what pain points they're struggling with. Especially with our product like ours too, it has so many different features. And so it's hard to script a very generic demo that's going to cover everything. And if you did, I think it would end up being overwhelming. But if you have a deep understanding of the 2 to 3 things that they really care about, And I see more impatience even when you're talking to execs and people like that, right? It's
Yes,
like they just want
yes.
this one or two things. And so if you can really anchor everything on that, I think you will have just a more effective conversation. But you need to get that information up front by listening, right?
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
This is going to be a question that's most likely get you and I into trouble. As you now move into a motion where you have sales led thinking and a sales led GTM strategy coming into place, how do you balance product led thinking? How do you make sure that the product led thinking does not fall to the side in the rush to become a B2B, how do you say, domain expert, or delivering on the B2B promise that you made? How would you balance that? Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a big part of my day to day. So right now I'm on kind of the workspace team. That's the team name. Informally, we're doing a lot of work to support larger deployments. Yeah, I mean, you talked about being sales led. I do think Gamma will always be product led, and so I'm just speaking from the experience of where I'm at right now, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
uh, but we need, if we want to become a new standard or a serious tool for businesses, this is where I think sales really helps us kind of achieve that scale and to get credibility and buy-in and work our way into large organizations. I think something I've observed is, and I can't name names, but we signed some contracts with large organizations before we even had the compliance machinery in our product that we needed to support
Yeah,
those deployments. Um, and so that's a little bit scary. You're kind of playing catch up, right? And you kind of have to build things to satisfy the agreement that was made, right? And I think usually there's some play there, but you're always thinking about, if I build this for this customer, is it reusable for the next one? And trying to, I think, not over opinionate the product too early.
right.
And so, God, there was a great quote from one of our retros the other day, but it's sort of like start with generally like start with these simple dumb solutions, and then layer in complexity or more
Complexity.
sophisticated solutions as it gets pulled out of you, because it's hard to know sometimes what the right amount is. But sometimes you can get away with a lot less than what someone will actually ask you for. So we've been building out a lot of like admin controls, so the ability to limit what content can be shared
Because
externally.
that's what you would need at the enterprise B2B layer,
Exactly.
right? Is to
Yeah.
convince people that you can control, and security is very core at the. But Nick, there's something you said that I want to double down on,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
You kind of said something which is very powerful. A lot of the companies that you cannot name, and I respect that, actually came to you guys because I guess your product led strategy had delivered a product that people could see, touch, feel, and knew that there's safety in that.
Hmm.
And then the leap to giving you guys the opportunity to come into the B2B space becomes easier because you already have a product that is doing so well and people have used it.
Yeah.
In If you don't mind me poking in that a little bit, is that in the B2B space, how many of your customers do you think are actually going to be those guys that actually tasted Gamma before and then jumped in? Can I assume that predominant people that are really cool about Gamma are the guys that used it first, loved it, and now are opening up the companies to do it, or are companies opening it up irrespective?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, is my understanding. It's funny because we've had this sort of joke internally that Gamma is kind of this like mistress or illicit lover, someone at a large company would use. They're like, I'm not supposed to use this tool, but it makes my life
But
easier.
it makes you nailed
And
it.
so
You
they're
nailed it,
using
Nick.
it
That
secretly. And I think this is happening with a ton of AI tools, by the way. But kind of what we've seen is that you get enough folks at an organization using a tool kind of illicitly. Um, you have a bottom up kind of there's a bottom up like grassroots appetite for it. And so they will then
yeah.
take that back to their leadership or their IT person, say like, what would it take to support this tool officially? So I would say that is probably the most common way that sales is kind of happening. And really right now we're just trying to match the demand. Like we get a lot of people kind of coming through our sales form. And so we're in this moment where there's a lot of bottom up demand for this, and it came from individuals trying it. But it's also the case that sometimes we have top down, where we have a leader at a company who
Who?
is really kind of trying to think ahead and figure out a way to bring AI to their companies in a way that isn't too intimidating. And I think that's something that Gamma does pretty well, is we take AI, which can be a little bit scary or not have too many guardrails, and I think like create a nice way for an end user to interact with it that's approachable. And so it's kind of both. It's weird. It's both this bottom up and a top down in some cases,
And
but
it,
it kind of just depends on the
I,
organization.
I can actually sympathize with that because I do think that that is true. And in fact, if I now look at this AI infusement that's going on, right, and I look at some of the adoption, it blows my mind where we were 4 years ago, Nick, with AI, right, and where we are today. And I'm just, how do you say this? I'm not even a coder or anything like that, right? I'm a guy that used the stuff. Initially, it bored me to death because I couldn't understand what. I also am not one of those guys who likes to make action images of himself and waste time on that stuff. But today, I actually am feeling that despite the onslaught, despite all the new stuff coming out, I mean, today, for as an example, when I use Gamma, Nick, I open the product and there's a button that says share. So I have a question for you. When
Hmm.
you are constantly competing with your own ambition, right? And you're now in this what I call ever-changing area where we I don't think you and I are ever going to go back to safety. There's no such thing as safety anymore, right? Every Monday, Replit says I'm doing this. Then the next day, Claude says, guess what? I'm doing Claude design, and voila, Figma goes down. If Gamma were listed, Gamma would see an impact as well, and all that. Nick, what do you guys think is a great way to respond to all these market changes? How do you scan? How do you make sense of what matters and what doesn't matter? Because there's a lot of noise, but there's also a lot of meaning right there, right?
Yeah. This is the always on question. I mean, I think like if I think about the experience of being a designer now versus 5 years ago, I think there's this sort of background level extinction risk that is a lot stronger and always on because the market is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
Um, it, I can maybe answer that question through just the lens of design.
Please
You
do.
know, one of the things I'm observing is just the speed at which you can build software keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. Um, and I think we saw it kind of first with engineering. And so like Claude Code has made it basically possible for engineers to not write code at all manually. And so we're still figuring out like what's the most effective way to work with that. Um, and then, yeah, there's this intermediate layer of like design, right? And I think design is kind of playing catch up a little bit as an industry. Like, how do you bring AI to it? And then the layer above that maybe is like product and what do we build? And does it resonate
What
with
do we-
people? And that feels like the hardest piece to automate right now. And so we're actually trying to hire a UX researcher to join Gamma to help us answer some of those
Make
questions. I feel like information, like these information gaps around user mental models or the way, let's say an organization wants to work, and do the solutions that you can come up with line up with that. That feels like the highest leverage work and the most important thing to nail right now. And so, yeah, even as a designer, I care more about that now. And it's kind of product-y work, but making sure we make good decisions there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. In fact, the question I want to ask now is that you just spoke about care, right? And let's talk
yeah,
about you, the individual, though.
sure.
At a very human level, right? When I speak to salespeople, they feel overwhelmed. There's something you said earlier, Nick, which I want to just bring to the notice of the B2B guys. We are all using AI. We are
Hmm.
all, a lot of guys in the corporate world are using Gamma below the radar, above the radar, but ultimately they say that, you know what, I am using it. Rightly, wrongly, they use it, they like it, and then they move on. Now, in your case, and in the case of salespeople, companies are using AI, but so are salespeople. Every
Yeah.
salesperson that I know has his own what I call shadow IT stack of AI.
Hmm.
The company has at least, let's say, two custom GPTs and an integration between CRM and CPQ that actually allows you to do deal analysis and so on. Awesome, right? But every sales guy has actually got his own GPT, his own cloud coworker running in the background. And I'm concerned about that. But the more concern I have is that at some point, Nick, you as a human being with all this consistent onslaught, how do you keep yourself mentally sharp in this noise? What have you figured out that allows you to maintain that focus? And it's a different question. It's not about the use of technology. It's about you keeping your sense making around while you see all this technology hitting you. How do you make sense of it? Because I'm sure in your mailbox every day there's 6 new tools in design, 5 new ways
Yeah.
of designing. How do you make sense of all of that?
I mean, this is a great question. Uh, I sometimes joke that my mom is from Sweden, and her parents were like farmers in northern Sweden, and genetically, I don't think any of us were equipped to deal with what we're dealing now in terms of the rate of change in AI.
Oh my
Certainly
gosh.
not me.
Yes, yes.
I don't feel that way, right? Like
Yeah.
thousands of years behind. And so I don't know. There are days I wake up and it feels very overwhelming, and there are days I wake up and it's exciting. And so I do feel like kind of and I don't know if this answers your question, but sort of taking care of your mental health and making sure you're not too locked into just your laptop and technology. Going and touching grass can actually help you feel a little bit better and more excited when you are thinking about just AI software in general. I think the other thing is just trying to zoom out too, and not be a doomer.
Hmm.
I think what was it in the 90s, the 20th century, there was this fear that we would run out of there'd be sort of this population bomb.
Food. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. We
we
were
would
going
all
to run out
start
of food.
starving.
Ma- We're going to be starving. You're right. They also told us that we're going to run out of what else? Oh, by now the world should be on fire because climate change would have destroyed the ozone layer and everything and stuff like that. Yeah, there's the but then so keep going. I'm curious as to where you're going with this, though. I want to just
Well,
understand your point of view on that.
yeah, I think it's more that none of us really know exactly what the future will hold too, and I think it pays to be generally pretty optimistic too. Because as much as this is changing everything too, there's always this flip side of like think about the power that you unlock and the time you get back in some cases. I think the thing I feel the most, and I've seen this in the market too, or in writings, is that um, I feel like AI has kind of turned everyone into a manager, because you could always be more productive by creating
By
this agent
yes,
to go away and do this thing too. And so
yes.
there's like productivity FOMO that's always on now, because you can work asynchronously or manage someone else who could be working at the same time. But I don't know. I'm a little bit of a late adopter with AI. I tend to wait for a tool to be recommended to me once or twice. Um, and that could be an approach too. I'm certainly not someone who lives just at the cutting edge,
I Here's
which
the
is fine.
funny thing about that. I kind
Yeah.
of understand where you're at because I'll tell you, 3 years ago I used to be in the oh my gosh, I gotta taste this, I gotta taste this, I gotta taste this, I gotta taste this. And ultimately I got brain freeze from all the ice creams I was tasting, right?
Mm,
And you gotta slow down and ask yourself, what is this in aid of? Because the way that, and I'll be honest with you, as a non-technical guy, my source of information is all the LinkedIn's of the world and then X's of the world. Now, on LinkedIn and X, there's one reality: people sell to each other on LinkedIn, right?
mm,
Every second DM is like, oh, I can improve your email. Oh, I can help you with your LinkedIn strategy. I'm a consultant. I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. Everyone's, and then I'm selling back to the same people. So it's a circular. It's like, Spider-Man in the multiverse. You too, and you too, and everyone's like, so here's what happens. So I go and there'll be some LinkedIn influencer pontification on Claude Cowork came out with this, and I'm like, ooh, I run. After half an hour, I actually realized that I've just wasted half an hour to figure out that, you know what, there's a good use case, but it's still difficult for me to do or whatever, whatever. I am also now in the where you are, which is hear the noise, kind of wait until the market subsides because there's a lot of time that you can waste. And I'll tell you a true story, Nick. This will make your brain explode. I'm speaking to 8 rockstar salespeople at the end of 2025 to ask them, how did you use AI over 2025? And they explain, oh, I did this, I did this, I did that, I did this, and I made this number 140% of quota, blah, blah, blah. And then I asked them a simple question: how long did it used to take to write an email before? And they were like, what? I said, how long did it take you to write an email before? A simple email. Customer says, Nick, here's my requirements. When can you get the proposal to me? And you reply back to an email and say to him, hey, thanks for this need. I have a few questions for you. Can we hop on a quick call? Blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, I still don't understand your question. I said, okay, let's give you a scenario. I gave him a scenario and I said, how long did it take you to write this email before? And he would say, 3 minutes. Cool. How long does it take you now? Nick, it'll blow your mind. 20 minutes. I said to him, but I thought you're using AI. He said, yeah. I use AI. But then AI tells me, hey, try this flavor. But by the way, you can personalize it this way. And then it tells me, oh, by the way, change the CTA to this. And then by the way, your next step should be this. He says, by the time I've reconciled all of this, I've gone beyond the 3, 6 minutes and I'm not the 8 to 10 minute mark. And then after that, I have to sit down and clean up the grammar and the style and my voice in it. I said to myself, okay, that's interesting. So the question I asked him was that as Cowork develops, as ChatGPT develops, do you think that they're going to get better and better and better? He says, yes, they are. But the problem now is that everyone's getting better. So you get to a point where you're going to have to differentiate yourself, Nick. And how do you differentiate yourself? And this is the fun part. We all come to the simple conclusion that It's actually less of AI in your day-to-day basic stuff.
Yeah.
AI used for where you can automate and benefit from it, which is the point you made. Hence why I brought this long story in here, right? Automate the difficult stuff, guys. But when it comes to customer communications, and I'm talking to the B2B community, is try to keep ownership of that, because that's where your voice has to come through. And Nick, it's really now, Nick, you mentioned that you one reason why you've maintained your sanity is because you are waiting for the noise to subside, correct? And then you get to a point where you are listening to. I understand that, Nick. Now I have a question for you. You figured that out. Nick, if I look at a growing company like Gamma, right? How do you think you're going to figure out your relationship with a changing world in terms of Gamma's strategy to go into the B2B space? How will you change your style of functioning? What do you think you're going to have to do to stretch on that front? And Nick, very importantly, question for you is, where do you see tensions potentially coming that you need to think about as you guys get higher into B2B?
Um, yeah. So, I mean, I think the first part around how will we adapt and change, something that I've seen be successful here is just be willing to try things. I think you have to kind of be bold and willing to experiment. And it's funny because within the product team, I'm actually probably one of the worst at this, but we have our head of design, Zach, and our head of product, John, who are very good at pushing and experimenting, even if things have rough edges. And so I think
Right.
we are always willing to kind of take those big bets. And I do feel like, again, always on sort of extinction risk in the background for a lot of B2B SaaS, be willing to experiment, even if it will incur some short-term pain. And then, how do I think that will play out? I mean, I can give one example, right? Like right now we are trying to take a product that has been mostly prosumer up market. And the biggest thing that has surprised me is how much companies will pay for removing control from an end user in service of
In
standardization.
service of standardization.
I always
Bingo.
remember your quote about McDonald's and the ice cream flavors and limiting customization because it hurts the ability to scale in a consistent way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one of the hard parts for us is having these sort of two different personas in mind, right? Someone who has full autonomy over the entire workspace, like what templates they have and what themes they can create or the fonts they can upload. And then a world in which, one of our long-term differentiators might actually be the total opposite of design freedom. It might be the ability to have governance and constraints upstream. And this has implications for like the way we design features and,
Correct.
do we start at the workspace level across all users or with personal stuff? These kinds of architectural questions. Yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now you guys had a very interesting crossroads. When I look at good product design or good product, right? We talk about user trust. How do you, Nick, think about user trust when you are building what do you call it, a feature and stuff like that, right? What creates trust the best in your case from a buyer user experience? How do you build trust into your mechanism that the product won't break, the product will deliver what it wants? And I like this word trust. I want to really just pump you for some information on that. How do you
Yeah.
ensure trust in the work you do?
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a little bit. Maybe like you could use the analogy of going into a doctor and what would
Yeah.
get you to trust a doctor, right? And I think part of it is seeing credentials, right? Because maybe you can't
Yes.
experience
There's a
healthcare if you
diploma on the
don't.
wall, right? A diploma on the wall.
Or yeah, like proxies for quality. So like it's a diploma on the wall, maybe it's the ZocDoc ratings. And then I think empathy is a thing. So, is this person listening to you and providing you a good service? Are they acknowledging kind of what's at stake, right? I think a lot of trust boils down to like what could go wrong and getting signal that that thing won't go wrong. Something that's interesting about our space, I mean, I'm kind of two minds of this, right? Like we're not, we're not building surgical equipment, we're building presentations, but presentations are high stakes events too. And so, you kind of think about trust as like the experience of crafting a presentation or bringing an idea into the world. And I think some of the things I've seen are just bugs really erode trust, unfortunately, because we like to move fast
Yes.
and we like to ship stuff. But
Yeah.
there's research out there that shows that even as a designer, I think you care a lot about like what are the crappy parts of your product, but bugs are actually at the top of the pain
At
point
the
list.
top of, yeah.
Yeah, for any end
I-
user, and I felt this.
Correct. And there's something you said there about trust, right? Nick, and I just want to make sure the audience kind of latches on to what you
Sure.
said. Nick, if I hear you correctly, you're actually looking at trust as something that's earned over time. You build towards it, you keep it in your mind. I like that notion. And anyone listening in, I think you also spoke about trust is also going to be built up in the terms of the quality of conversations you have with people and how you then reflect it back into the products you make. For salespeople listening, and I always told them, when you go sit with a customer, right, your customer is going to make sure that that you need to ask the right questions to get
Hmm.
the right answers, and then how you respond to those. And when a customer has an issue, how do you get that issue to bed, how do you close it, is how you earn trust. And now when you've earned trust, to maintain that trust, you need to reduce the amount of defects and the amount of messes you make. And that is what I really liked about your comment about bugs, right? Bugs happen because you're in a rush to ship. But when they happen, you do acknowledge that certain bugs will have a bigger impact. Therefore, your job and your role, I guess, is to minimize those bugs. Or when they happen, it's how fast you resolve it. So someone says, I saw the bug, but I really like the way they resolved it very quickly. That's how
Yeah.
you win back the trust that you might have let slip a little bit. So what I wanted to do though is I want to push it. Now, as someone listening, and I'm, let's say, 18 years old and I'm entering college, and I kind of hear Nick and I'm like, wow, this product design sounds like a pretty cool thing. Nick, what would you tell people? Is there a, I heard you say that you did an economics degree, and then because your parents were engineers, you did this, you did this. But honestly, what I really heard was as follows: there's no specific path to success, right? You got to love what you do, I guess, right? So, what advice would you give a 18-year-old starting college who says he wants to be a product designer, or
Mm.
maybe going into product management, just to keep it broad? Any guidance you want to give to someone like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the trend is towards I don't know, the cost of individual specialties becoming lower because you have large language models that sort of have
You're
godlike
right.
capability,
Yeah,
right?
the barrier
Um,
to entry is just disappearing, eroding. Yeah.
yeah, and also, any industry could be disrupted so quickly at any time. I mean, I think about this as a designer too. Like, let's say design crashes, what's my backup career too? And
What's
so
my
I do
backup?
think,
Yeah.
and this is funny because it's actually something that has always been a value of mine, but has sort of now come into vogue is just being a little bit of a generalist, right? Learning to love a couple of different things rather than being perfectly siloed. And as someone who studied economics, it's sort of bad advice from a labor market standpoint. Generally the labor market will tend to reward this one specialist in this one narrow thing.
Specialization. Yes, correct.
But
Correct.
like a stock portfolio, you want to not put all your eggs in a single basket too. And so that would be kind of my advice, right? And then I think the other is, learn to love a couple things and to see the connections between them. I think there will be things that are evergreen. I actually think that sales is probably something that will never be fully automated. If
I
there's a
love,
human buyer on the other end, right? Because humans want to interact with other humans, and those relationships are hard to automate.
I
Um,
love that one. I love that, Nick, because I think this is a very valuable point that I want to make sure the B2B selling sales community understands. Because the one question I get, Nick, is salesperson to Deepak, will I lose my job to AI? And my response is as follows, Nick, and tell me if you agree with this or not. Yes, you will lose your job to AI if you're going to keep talking like that. And by the way, you're most likely not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who used AI. So you got to figure this one out.
yeah.
Nick, as a designer, you just said something really interesting and you just kind of slipped it in there, but I'm not going to let you get away with that so easily. You also said, I sit back and think about, and I've actually come to the conclusion, what's my fallback if something were to go wrong in design? Powerful statement. Even you at your level are actually thinking about reality, right? Because of the things that are shifting, the shifting sands. And then you kind of also gave an answer. The answer to that scenario also is that I therefore decided that I would like to be a generalist so that I can make an impact which is more broader. And sorry about that. People tell me, Deepak, what do you think about generalist versus specialization? It's as follows. Nick, today I've realized, and challenge me on this if you disagree. Being a generalist is going to make sure that you are designed like a camel's foot. You will actually not sink into the sand, you will stay on the sand.
Mm,
That's how I look at it. At the same time, in AI, when you get to a certain point, you need to be either hyper focused and hyper specialized to see big bucks. Because if you're going to try to be the generalist, will survive, but the bucks will come from hyper specialization. Now, previously,
yep.
that hyper specialization was more shallow. Now, my suspicion is it's going to get very, very, very structured. There'll be 4 or 5 things that are going to happen that are going to force people to go deep into that one node. And it's like in legal, I go to a copyright lawyer, he's a separate mindset. But ultimately, they all study the same thing. My suspicion with AI technology and the type of work you do is even the degrees are going to get variated, and in fact you may lose that because people are going to get hands on the job exposure, and because of so much things are changing. Eh, think about it this way, Nick. In the last 10 years your entire degree has gone 180 degrees, correct, with AI. So if you were building a degree based on static courses, right, I got to do econ 101, econ 102, econ 103, or principles of micro, principles of macro, and then you get into international economics, right? That was the flow that we used to study economics in. All right, now I'm just stunned. I see, and in this conversation itself, I think we went to Econ 101, we got Econ 103, and I think we are also in Econ 109, which is a, what do you call it, ungraded open syllabus paper. So, Nick, as we start winding this conversation down, right, I really want to ask you one simple question then. Now you've got this guy that's finished his journey, he's decided to study this, right? And he now enters the design arena. Nick, at 21 years of age, if I could teleport you back to you sitting at your desk doing your work with longer hair and a hippie vibe, and you walk in and you sit down, what advice would you give to a 21-year-old designer who just hit the first job, or they just graduated, they're going to hit the first job? What would you tell them? What are the top two, three, four, five things that you think they need to focus on to build a successful career as a designer in this day and age at age 21? Do it now and reap the benefits forever.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think there's a big gap like between getting that first job, which is the hardest part, honestly, and then being in career. So I think about those sort of as two different things. The hardest part, at least, and then went through this a decade ago. It was a slightly different time, but is having done the upfront work. Design is a very portfolio-driven industry, and so
Yeah.
having the case studies that you can walk through and assets and a point of view about how you went through the design process is really important to get in the door. And then, yeah, I think once you're on the other side, I mean, I talked about some of the value being a generalist. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I've heard that companies like Slack and was it Salesforce, they have like a builder program for product managers where
Yeah.
they're sort of like pushing generalism. It's like you do a little bit of all these different things too. And so, yeah, experimenting and also leaning into AI too. It's really fun. Something I did that has I feel like we sort of skated to where the puck was going to be. Zach, the head of design, was just code, right? And we would like build code prototypes before AI, and now it's
Before AI.
so cheap and so easy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, getting comfortable with that. I really think, at least within product design, the future will look a lot more like building just in code, like native code. And so,
When you say
getting really
native
comfortable
code,
with that.
sorry about that. I'm an illiterate. What's native code?
Yeah. So I guess what I mean by that is you could think about like mockups, which are drawings of software versus like a code branch, like a little living piece of software, or a
Software which
custom
you've.
version of your code base. Yeah.
Okay. Got
And
it.
yeah, like it's not that the lower fidelity, we would say like wireframey stuff will ever fully go away, but yeah, the solutioning side, again, I just kind of come back to solutioning side is getting cheaper and faster and easier than ever too. So yeah,
So,
learning to enjoy
Nick,
that.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to wrap up. Nick, how do people find you? You are on LinkedIn, right? So, what are we looking for? I mean, if someone wants to reach out to you, what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's /Nik Payne, NIKPAYNE. And then I also just have a personal site. If there's a designer watching, I do try to be open to mentorship as well. There's a section on my personal site, nikpayne.com, that you can contact me that way. But I'm pretty available.
Nickpayne.com, right? I'm
Yep.
going to add it to my notes as well. I'll make sure to publish that out for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Nick, I'm going to bid adieu, sir. We are at the 44-minute mark. I really enjoyed this conversation. I will be converting this into a write up for my newsletter. When I publish this, it goes onto YouTube, it goes onto LinkedIn. My write up is actually going to go a bit deeper into some of the elements that you and I discussed. I will choose 4 items from what we spoke about and put that in writing for people to double click on. Some people like to read, some people like to just watch. We'll see how that goes. But Nick, I really appreciate the time that you gave to me, sir. I've learned a lot, really enjoyed this conversation. And it's always difficult, right? Coming in from a product design space to talk about B2B selling. How do we connect the dots? The reality is that the listeners actually have to do that work for themselves. I think you've done a stupendous job of explaining how design works in general, how Gamma is working on design. And I got a lot of personal feedback, Nick, in terms of how you handle your own motivations, your own approach to AI, right? Slow down. I actually wait for other people to tell me what to use, because that also eliminates. I don't know how to say this to you, but it's always easy, right? My mom always said the reason why I eat at the last is people then tell me which is the best part of the. So if she's in a buffet, she always eats last, because 10 people eat before, and then she says to them, what did you like? What did you like? What did you like? And she only gets those four things. The rest she just throws out.
I have the same
So
strategy, by the way, with like Netflix shows, right? I never want to watch all of the
you
net new
never
stuff.
want
I want to wait for
exactly.
people to tell me what's good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And to be honest with you, 4 years ago with AI, I used to think that I have to dip into every salad dressing, I have to drink every Kool-Aid, and I've just realized you don't need to do all that. But Nick, thank you very much for your time. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the future. And as always, thanks for everything you do. I really appreciate Gamma as a team. I think Gamma is made up of some exceptional people, and you, sir, are one of those people. I want to just give a great shout out for you to being on my show. And I hope that people listening in actually begin to understand how product design can actually inform the sales process. And we connected on pain, we connected on asking the right questions, and we literally, I really felt that there's so much that we connected on that I actually think sales is everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, and Nick is
Yeah.
a living example of that. Nick, take care, boss.
Thanks so much, Deepak. Cheers.
My pleasure.